understand the priorities that you have expressed as it relates to where we should be involved with and supportive of private investment, private development projects, and then provide a preview of a project that has been introduced to us with a formal submittal that is under consideration. And that is not for action today, and wouldn't expect action on that, but certainly would welcome any questions that you might have. Again, Catherine Malmberg, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. If we can move to the next slide. So here we summarize what we've heard from the board in the past around the priorities. There are geographical priorities around the focus on heart of the city, Discovery Square, and transit-oriented development. As far as product types, we are preferencing med tech and workforce housing, and we've been deprioritizing recently hospitality and market rate housing. Obviously, we're always measuring every project that comes in against the financial goals of the DMC, the investment figures, job creation, tax base, growth potential. The market opportunities, we're looking for projects that are supported by the market, but might need a little boost to validate that market demand. We're looking to start that flywheel, prove the case, so that other market projects can come in afterwards, because the DMC has helped get that flywheel going. Obviously, we have very ambitious sustainability targets that we're looking for all projects to achieve. And then, in my mind, most importantly, how does a project contribute to the city for health? Contributions to that experience goal. If you move to the next slide, you can see that this board, in adopting the 2020 DMC plan update, also layered in some additional areas of focus around economic diversification, housing affordability, Main Street innovation, supporting local entrepreneurs, and a special priority on local minority and women-owned business capacity, growing that within the DMC. Next slide, please. So just as a refresher on how we've teed up the private development, this board approved for phase 2, which is 2020 to 2025, around $200 million of public infrastructure support. Further, the board anticipated about $25 to $45 million of that being private development support during that 5-year phase 2 period. And then on an annual basis, this board approves private development support. So for the past 2 years, there was an approval of a $7 million strategic development budget, and then a $3 million subsequent budget for a total of $10 million. And then on a quarterly basis, specific project applications are reviewed and have to get that yes and yes approval from the board and the city council. So to that end, in that context, we have received a new application that's currently under review.
Maybe we should just pause here to see if there's any questions or observations members would have with respect to any of the priorities or focus areas that we just walked through. And again, this sort of we call it our financial nesting doll group. So sort of the layers of the financial lens that we also use.
Well, actually, Patrick, I'll take advantage of this pause. Can you go back 2 slides? Can you, maybe Catherine, can you just kind of articulate the definition of hospitality housing? I don't want to make an assumption here. Under that product type bullet point.
Sure, yes. So in this particular bullet, we were referring to hospitality as conventionally they're seen as hotels. They would be subject to hotel tax. That would probably be the clearest way to differentiate them from housing. And so in the past, the board has seen the hotel market as very robust. We've already exceeded the projections in the original DMC plan in terms of new hotel keys. So when the update was adopted, that was noted that we are sort of ahead of schedule in terms of the number of hotel keys, and therefore more focus on workforce housing seemed appropriate.
Yeah, my 2 cents would be that maybe just referring to it more directly as hotel development would be helpful, not to differentiate or to differentiate that from workforce housing for the hospitality industry.
Okay.
So,
I think, yes, very helpful.
Madam Chair.
Member Rayback?
First off, I think that's great. I wanted to actually call attention to under market opportunity, first in market opportunities. I think this is a really, really important point that we may not necessarily know exactly what that is, but the whole goal is to stimulate a private market beyond where it's at to a point where we want it to be. That's what we did early on with hotel. We don't need to do that anymore with hotel. It's what we're doing now with Discovery Square. I don't know exactly what that's going to mean, but I think that's probably going to be one of the most exciting and important parts of it. It could be, for instance, that there needs to be more retrofitting of second stories to be able to be less expensive, more flexible space for entrepreneurs or something like that. But I just think that's one that first to market opportunities, that could be a real important point.
Member Norton?
Thank you. Under product type, I'm sorry, I'm having. Under, it says we're preferencing workforce housing and deprioritizing market rate housing. And I understand that, and the community screams for affordable housing and market rate housing, or workforce housing. But I think we need to remember that for some, and it was particularly my little antenna went off when you talked about the number of seniors that are moving downtown. There are thousands of seniors living in small, affordable homes in this community that are not being freed up because they can't find places to live. And yet they don't see themselves as moving into affordable housing. So and workforce housing is probably what we're talking about here, but it doesn't, again, when we use terminology, it doesn't necessarily, so if we could put workforce and senior housing, maybe even.
I'll second that.
Yeah, to share this idea that there is affordable housing in our city, but many of us have 4-bedroom homes that are 1 bedroom is being used because there's no alternative to move to. And so I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. I think you noted, and you see Kevin noting that as well.
Member Baker?
Yeah, I just have a question. So why is market rate housing deprioritized?
I should clarify that this is in terms of priorities for receiving public subsidy. And that is the context for this overall. I think we recognize obviously that there's a significant amount of market rate housing that will also need to be built. But past conversations, we have been hearing that there are projects proceeding without any public subsidy, so the market has sort of been proven in the case.
I think it is, this is the art of this work, and it is important to recognize that there are plenty of ways to invest or to incent development that are beyond or don't require a financial subsidy. And so I think in concert with particularly the city, looking for ways to attract private investment and to facilitate private investment in areas that perhaps aren't priorities for a public subsidy, it will be a continued part of the effort and the partnership really with the public entities here, because that vitality in the downtown area, which is core for us, really happens very successfully in the evening hours based on the resident rates in the downtown and the disposable income for that matter as well. So we'll look forward to hearing more, but I think in terms of public subsidy, I think this is very accurate. We appreciate the opportunity to really provoke this kind of discussion and get additional feedback.
So I will build and agree with that, because the absence or the lack of market rate housing is part of the creation for the need of lower rate housing, because and so I think we want to prioritize it probably in a different way. And so I just think signaling and everything else, and I think you're exactly right. How quickly are we approving? How quickly do we have open doors to those who want to build housing. And I think honestly, living in the cities, we're getting this exactly wrong and not understanding the cause and effect of what's happening here. And our people that are moving into the cities are having a hard time finding affordable housing. And it's not a landlord problem, it's a lack of housing problem.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Williams?
Yeah, it's a complicated conversation, and the market will produce market rate housing. The market won't produce affordable housing, and so figuring out, and I would argue very much so that getting the private sector involved in production of affordable housing is absolutely critical. What we have is a mismatch, right? We're not producing the amount of affordable housing that in fact the market needs. That's to the mayor's point, the community is demanding that, including senior housing, modestly priced senior housing, multi-family housing. So I think it's a mix of both of those. I would agree that it's important to not say that we're deprioritizing market rate housing. I think we need to say we are continuing to prioritize workforce housing and affordable housing. When you look at the list of housing projects that were shown in the original map, right? I don't know, is the 501 project an affordable project? I don't know that any of those buildings
Oh.
were affordable buildings in terms of, am I right about that?
Residents, one of them was.
Brick.
Right.
Residents of Discovery Square.
And again, the brick model, I think, is fantastic, right? A great example of a mixed income, 182 unit transit-oriented development where we put in, I think, $3 million. To me, that one of the bigger questions is about the level of investment that we make in these different priorities. Again, it's early on here for Discovery Square 3. The request is for $12.7 million in DNC dollars. How do we balance that, or how do we prioritize that relative to an affordable housing investment of $3 million? That's kind of the devil in the details in terms of some of these priorities. So.
I do think as well that this is, I mean, this complexity, this is beyond just the geography of the DMCC. I think it's, within the broad confines of the city and the broader county and frankly, this region. And thinking about having a sufficient supply to meet demand of the type of housing in the geography where people want to live is a real challenge, because as Member Norton points out, having an opportunity for seniors to move out of their desirable, affordable, single-family home elsewhere in the community and perhaps consider a downtown housing solution that may not require a financial subsidy, in point of fact, is really part of the goal. So I think this really emphasizes the really digging into the housing discussion as a follow-up for the forum that was held here just recently. I have Member Ryback, Member Campbell, and then Member Carlson. Did I miss anybody?
I'll make it quick, but I want to pivot off your comment, Chair, about there are many ways to support housing. As we're talking about this, I think we want to remind ourselves that it's not always about supporting the individual project. The discussion about trying to bring the Soldiers Field into the community creates the opportunity. We're investing in public realm that creates a more valuable opportunity for housing. The lack of progress we've made on the river, and I only say that to keep inspiring us to go there, creates the ability for us to have the market driven to create more opportunities there. The ability to have the west terminus of the transit be a transit village where you can actually live on water and bike to work or transit to work is about stimulating market rate housing. So I do believe ideally all of this eventually is about us creating common ground that allows private investment. And I do think that's really where we can make a real serious mark.
Member Campbell.
For the September meeting, I'd like to see you summarize by each one of these buckets the actions that we have taken. Housing, I'd like to see where we have actually taken action and the implications in each one. I'm thinking about, having been here since day one, I recall the controversy of us providing some assistance for an apartment project across from St. Mary's, which I read in the paper in the last month or so, sold at the highest value per unit in the history of the state of Minnesota. So I'd like to just be able to take a look at the actions we've taken and what the status of each one of those projects happens to be at this point in time.
Member Carlson?
Sure, I'm just jotting some thoughts down. Okay, so I think that it's wonderful. We're focusing on housing and housing across the spectrum for sure. But I also think we need to be getting really creative in our housing solutions and how DMC supports housing. I'm really looking forward to September when we learn more about how the needs align with what sort of resources we actually have available to us at DMC to subsidize this work. We are obviously in a time of increased labor and material costs, and we know of several developers who are coming back to us with additional asks, additional, not only financial, but potentially changes to the project to make these projects work. Some are coming to both DMC and the city to make these projects work. And my understanding, based on our Maxfield study of our housing needs in this community, is we don't actually have enough dollars to offset the cost to make our affordable needs, or to meet our affordable housing needs. So I'm really concerned with this. I'm also really concerned about excess commercial space downtown and where there might be opportunity to think creatively about reducing some of the barriers to turning some of that space potentially into housing. So it's time to get creative. The same status quo of projects in these big multifamily complexes isn't going to meet the needs that we actually have in our community.
So Patrick, I think, and Catherine, you have your work sign out for you between now and September, but I want to move back to the presentation because I know that we have more to cover, and we also want to talk a little bit about Discovery Square, perhaps the third phase. So
Yeah, thank you.
turn back to you.
Thank you. And for the record, I will just be public that the word deprioritizing was not your word, it was ours. So acknowledging that, and this is super helpful to the conversation. We would like to spend a moment just previewing a project that has been introduced to us formally through the application process